And now it's time for Illinois in Focus with the Center Square Daily. I'm your host, Greg Bishop, and today at the Illinois Supreme Court in Springfield, a couple of different cases being debated in front of Supreme Court justices concerning Illinois' firearm owner's ID card. This is a card that's required by Illinois residents to be able to purchase and possess firearms and ammunition. And the card itself, several requirements. You've got a $10 fee, a recent picture, and a valid driver's license. And those things seem to be easy to obtain, and you can go get a valid FOID card to then be able to purchase firearms and ammunition. But there are some other provisions that Illinois State Police spell out in their rules and the eligibility to get one of those FOID cards. Among those are you cannot be a convicted felon under the laws of any jurisdiction. State police also spelling out that you cannot be adjudicated a, quote, mental defective. Also, you can't be a mental patient in an institution for the past 5 years, not intellectually disabled or developmentally disabled in the past year, and also not addicted to certain substances, plus a whole host of others that you saw there in the graphic, spelling out who is eligible for a firearm owner ID card. Now, there have been several cases brought up to the Illinois Supreme Court challenging the constitutionality of requiring somebody have a piece of identification provided by the state that allows you to purchase firearms and ammunition. As the Second Amendment says, a well-regulated militia being necessary for the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. You can see the questions being raised by Second Amendment supporters that having a state-issued ID as a requirement to obtain a firearm is an infringement. We've seen multiple cases in front of the Illinois Supreme Court challenging this, but each time the Illinois Supreme Court's taking procedure to essentially remand cases back to the lower courts for them to deal with certain types of questions. Well, today, in front of the Illinois Supreme Court, they did hear a case concerning individuals who are challenging the FOID statute. And Elizabeth Cook, an assistant appellate defender for James Benson, she spelled out in her arguments in front of the Illinois Supreme Court that the FOID card does not match up with the Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms.
Under the framework announced in Bruin and Rahimi, the burden is on the state to point to a historical analog that is similar in the same purpose and the same manner that it regulates firearm possession. Those people who are law-abiding definitely do have Second Amendment rights. But in fact, as we can see from the example set in Rahimi, the court considers all American citizens to have Second Amendment rights, and then will conduct the historical analysis to determine whether the regulation at issue is based in history and justified by the policies that would have motivated people at the time of the founding. Permanent prohibition on Benson's firearm possession with criminal penalties for violations based on a prior conviction for nonviolent conduct is incompatible with our nation's historical tradition and thus violated the Second Amendment as applied to him. The legislative scheme outlined in the FOID Card Act, a presumptive lifetime ban on firearm possession subject to inexact criteria and complete government discretion, has no historical analog.
Now, legal documents show that from a bench trial, James Benson was found guilty of one count of reckless discharge of a firearm, one count of unlawful use or possession of a weapon by a felon, and one count of misdemeanor domestic battery. Benson was sentenced to 4 years in prison, and the direct appeal from the judgment is what the court was taking up. No issue being raised about the charging instruments in that case, but the plaintiffs there, the defense in this case, saying that the recent rulings out of the U.S. Supreme Court are highlighting that, in their argument, the FOID card in Illinois is unconstitutional. But the state being represented by Garson Fisher as the Assistant Attorney General, he says that the U.S. Supreme Court has greenlit states like Illinois that have a similar type of identification process for gun owners.
Both Heller and then McDonald explicitly held that prohibitions against felons possessing firearms are constitutional. This court in Burns, relying on those opinions, reached the same conclusion. And that conclusion was actually reinforced in Bruin. when the court reaffirmed the holding of those earlier cases that the Second Amendment protects the rights of law-abiding citizens to possess firearms. Now, that category, law-abiding citizens, necessarily excludes all felons. Now, my friend says that the mechanism in the FOID Card Act itself is unconstitutional under Bruin, but Bruin is actually inapposite to that provision. What Bruin is talking about is the presumption that ordinary law-abiding citizens have a right to possess firearms. And in footnote 9, it recognized that shall-issue licensing regimes, including Illinois', are constitutional because they do presumptively allow law-abiding citizens to possess firearms.
Now, the Illinois Supreme Court took that case and a second case concerning Illinois' firearm owner ID card under advisement, which means it could be weeks to months before we find out how the Illinois Supreme Court rules on this. But you also have to consider other cases that are working through the state judiciary, including another case concerning a challenge to the constitutionality of the firearm owner ID card expected to be heard by the Illinois Supreme Court next week. Now, that's the state courts. We have not seen any movement on challenges against Illinois' gun and magazine ban. You have the Veramontes case out of Cook County, which includes challenging the state's gun and magazine ban of semi-automatic firearms and magazines over certain capacities. Still in front of the U.S. Supreme Court. Whether or not they're going to take that case has not been revealed. But then you've also got the Barnett case, which has a Southern District federal judge in Illinois determining that the state's ban is unconstitutional. That case has been heard by the appeals court, but that was back in September of 2025, and it's been months since gun owners have had any certainty on what's going to happen with that case. So still plenty more to come when it comes to litigation against Illinois gun regulations and whether or not those are constitutional. Early voters across the state have been heading to their county election offices to cast early ballots for weeks, but Election Day is just around the corner, just over a week before the polls close. One of the big primary races everyone's watching across the state is the race for the Republican nomination to take on incumbent Governor J.B. Pritzker. I ran into Aaron Delmar. He's the running candidate for former state senator Darren Bailey. Delmar was at a gun range in northern Illinois. He is the running mate of Bailey, who ran against Pritzker 4 years ago and lost. Bailey had a different lieutenant governor candidate 4 years ago. Before a potential rematch, Bailey and Delmar, they must fight to get through that race for the primary where there's 4 candidates, Bailey being one of them. You also have businessman Rick Heidner on the ballot, analyst Ted Dabrowski on the ballot, and DuPage County Sheriff James Mendrick on the ballot. I asked Delmar over the weekend about their confidence levels heading into the final home stretch and whether or not they're going to come out on top.
You know, I'm cautiously optimistic. Our polling shows us with a very strong lead. Our message is showing a very strong lead. Nowhere in Illinois history have you had a team like Darren and I, where you have somebody that is the intersection of Clay County and Cook County, rural Illinois and the city of Chicago, combining together for one team, for one goal, and that's to take our state back. And this is a tremendous opportunity that we can do so much more for the people of Illinois. We have the understanding of how government works. We've done it through the grassroots movement. Just from our petitions, we had 14,400 people, volunteers, regular, average day people that signed our petition to get us on the ballot. That's what a grassroots campaign looks like. We're not having paid canvassers like J.B. Pritzker are standing in front of Walmart trying to beg for signatures. The people want us, and it's all over the state, and the opportunity is there. We just need to go, and we need to work hard and get it.
On the issues, affordability expected to dominate the race. Last week in Springfield, Pritzker was asked about whether the minimum wage should be increased. Right now, it's at $15 an hour in Illinois.
Very important that we raise the minimum wage. I believe that we need to have a living wage for people, and it's something that we always ought to be considering. How do we put more money in people's pockets? You want to make life more affordable for people, help them get a raise.
Delmar said the real affordability issue is taxes are too high in Illinois.
He wants to increase the sales tax. He wants to increase income tax and making it unaffordable more than it currently is in Illinois. That's how you lift the burden of the taxes from people. Give them that opportunity to thrive in Illinois, not just survive. You know, as a small business owner here in Illinois, I was able to build my business and scale it nationwide. It wasn't because of Illinois. It was in spite of Illinois. that is the way that I think we can lift all ships, and we can start bringing people back because we make Illinois competitive. When you lose 250,000 people that don't come back and you lose that congressional seat, you lose your voice in Washington, but you also lose these people and their tax revenue. We could turn the ship around if we start bringing people back and spreading that burden across more people instead of those that just can't pick up and leave like others.
According to Wallet Hub, in a report they released recently, the land of Lincoln has the highest state and local taxes and the highest annual tax rates on median households, coming in 53% higher than the U.S. average. The lowest tax rates were found in Alaska, Delaware, and Wyoming. So it'll be interesting to see what other issues surface, but of course we've got to get through that primary. There is another Republican debate set for this evening in Northbrook, but only 3 of the 4 candidates will be there. Dabrowski, Heidner, and Mendrick set to participate in that event hosted by Students for Illinois. Bailey is skipping the debate to attend a campaign event in Pekin. Primary election day, Tuesday next week, March 17th. Meanwhile, the Illinois Senate, they're returning to session this week, and they've got a bill deadline for Friday to see what kind of measures are going to come out of Senate committees. All of this while the House also has some deadlines on their calendar, but they're not in this week. They'll come back next week, and then it's going to be several weeks of busy activity in both the House and Senate as they march towards that May 31st deadline to get a budget passed. In other headlines for Illinois, the Obama Presidential Center scheduled to open with a series of events June 18th to the 21st in Chicago. The project was delayed several times since its 2021 groundbreaking, and estimated construction costs rose from $350 million to at least $830 million. A dedication ceremony is planned June 18th, followed by the public opening June 19th, and a community celebration June 20th and the 21st. Find those headlines and many more at thecentersquare.com. We've got an election in less than a week and a lot of choices to be made, not just who's going to be the Republican gubernatorial candidate, but also who's going to be the candidate for the Republicans and the Democrats for U.S. Senate after U.S. Senator Dick Durbin from Springfield announced that he was not going to run for another term. That opened up that seat, and we've got a handful of candidates for Republicans and like 10 candidates for Democrats. One of those Republican candidates joining us now for the Center Square Daily, Don Tracy. Thank you for taking time with us. How are things looking out there in these final days?
Glad to be on your show. Thank you for this opportunity. Good to see you again since we last saw you at the debate up in Chicago at Benedict University, 5:60 a.m. I think the race is looking really good for the primary. I have 5 opponents, but everybody tells me I'm the front runner, and everywhere I go, people say, "You've got this." Actually, it makes me very nervous to hear that because we're running through the tape. We're taking nothing for granted. But all signs are that we're doing very, very, very well in every corner of the state. One sign is that I have over 150 Republican leaders, institutions, and grassroots organizations have endorsed me. For example, every single Republican legislator that has endorsed in Illinois in this race has endorsed me. The Young Republicans of Illinois, statewide, have endorsed me. The Young Republicans of McLean County, the Illinois Family Institute, the Polish American Police Association just endorsed me recently. Almost all the Chicago suburb townships that have endorsed me. Almost every Republican elected official in my home county here in Springfield, Sangamon County, have endorsed me. I don't think any of the other 5 have a single home county endorsement. Most of them are from Cook County, as are the leading Democrats on the other side. And I have the only Cook County, countywide elected Republican official as an endorsement. So based on the endorsements, I think we're doing pretty well. But of course, the only endorsement I really care about, that I'm really focused on, is the endorsement of the voters next Tuesday.
Now, obviously, at the Center Square, we focus on how government impacts taxpayers. What are you hearing from taxpayers when it comes to things like the national debt, things like social service programs, things like immigration enforcement?
I hear more about property taxes in Illinois than I hear about anything else because we are a leading state when it comes to property taxation. And I saw Wallet Hub just gave us a trophy for being the overall leading tax state. And then on, but the number one issue I hear about, Greg, is of course cost of living, and then immigration, and then the Iran war. Those are the three big things. And crime. I mean, crime is in Illinois. I mean, that's that's a subject, particularly when I'm up in Chicago, and I spend a fair amount of time in Chicago. In fact, I was riding the Red Line. I rode the Red Line, I don't know, a couple months ago, shortly before that career criminal had been arrested 72 times, tried to burn alive Bethany McGee on the Blue Line. And then I was sleeping there in I have a Chicago condo that I bought fairly recently because I knew I'd be spending a lot of time up there. Just a few blocks north of that flash mob. After when they had their tree lighting, only in Chicago, they have a tree lighting ceremony, and there's a 300-person flash mob that ends up with eight people being shot in near the Chicago River, not far from the Trump Tower, and just a few blocks from where I was staying. So crime, when you're in Chicago, crime is the issue more than anything else.
Well, Don, as somebody who's running for U.S. Senate, how would you being in the U.S. Senate impact the local decisions of property tax rates for a school district in central Illinois, for instance?
Well, one of the ways is through by promoting a school choice and the school choice provision in the Big Beautiful Act. And, the governor of Illinois has a choice to make. He can either opt in, as many governors have already done, and pull in money from the federal government that will not take a single dollar away from Illinois public schools, and will provide an opportunity for particularly poor kids to be able to escape bad public schools. I mean, we have some great public schools here in Illinois, but some of them are very substandard, some of the worst in the nation, particularly up in the Chicago area. And through this program, we can get some help there for those poor kids that want to have the choice that teacher union leaders like Stacey Davis Gates, they have, because of her high salary. I think she makes in the hundreds of thousands. She can send her kids to private schools, but most of the kids in the CPS, which she more or less seems to run, they don't have that choice. And this would help give them that choice. And if the governor doesn't opt in to this federal program, then Illinois taxpayers will still be able to get this federal tax credit, but that money will not go to Illinois schools. It will go to out-of-state schools.
Don, on the issue of crime, on the issue of immigration, obviously Illinois has, sanctuary policies for non-citizens. We've got no cash bail. The Trump administration has proposed and has ordered that federal dollars be held from states that have these types of policies. Do you support that in trying to change local policy by restricting federal tax dollars?
Well, one of the problems, with relying on federal dollars to run state projects, state responsibilities, is usually federal dollars come with strings attached. And when the Democrats are in charge of Washington, those attached strings are like DEI or, some kind of, liberal thing. But when Republicans are in charge of Washington, the strings attached are more likely to be, responsibility strings, such as if we're going to provide federal dollars to help with mass transit in Chicago, and Chicago needs help with mass transit. And mass transit is really important to the Chicagoland area. Then it should have, we should have strings attached. Like, if we're going to give you federal money, then you need to have real security on the trains. We can't have career criminals terrorizing train riders, and then which reduces in declining ridership, which reduces results in fewer fares, and the need for more subsidies, either with state dollars or with federal dollars. So, I mean, it's just, these are the kind of common sense solutions that I plan to champion in Washington, D.C. That seems to be sorely lacking, certainly in Illinois government.
Don, some of the other major issues, obviously, that are going to be debated throughout Senate races across the country, including here in Illinois, obviously the Iran war, and whether or not that is a war that Congress should be declaring. Your thoughts on the ability for the president to conduct these types of military operations and how much involvement Congress should have?
Well, the thing to remember about the Iranian conflict is that we've basically been in conflict with Iran for 47 years, ever since they overthrew the Shah of Iran. One of the first things they did was they disregarded diplomatic, long-standing, centuries-old diplomatic immunity by taking hostages from our U.S. embassy in Iran and holding those hostages. I think there are 52 of them for over a year, for 444 days. And that started the conflict. And the other thing to remember is that Iran is the world's leading state sponsor of terrorism. In fact, the U.S. Congress just confirmed that in the U.S. House with a resolution that was supported by was a bipartisan vote, supported by 150 Democrats in addition to, I think, all the Republicans. But it's notable that two of the leading candidates for this nomination to replace Dick Durbin in the U.S. Senate, both of them, both of those Democrats, voted against that resolution. And the other thing to remember about Iran is that their foreign policy for 47 years has been death to America. And they have backed that up with the bombing of Khobar Towers, the bombing of the USS Cole, bombing in Beirut, all the roadside mines in Iraq that killed so many American soldiers and maimed many thousands more. So this has been a conflict that we have been kind of fighting with one hand behind our back, and at some point you make a choice. And the Democrat talking point today, if you've been watching the news, is it's a war of choice. Trump's waging a war of choice. Well, the real choice here in dealing with a terrorist state like Iran is appeasement or conflict. And Obama and Biden both tried appeasement by negotiating with Iran. And look what that got us. That got us proxy wars with the Houthis, Hamas, and Hezbollah. And the Hamas war. It got us, some would argue it got us the invasion of Crimea and Ukraine by Russia. Appeasement just does not, you try to negotiate first. Trump tried that here. It didn't work. So the choice here was not between conflict and no conflict. It was between appeasing a country that both sides of the aisle have for decades agreed on a bipartisan basis that a terrorist state like Iran cannot be allowed to have a nuclear weapon. And they're on the verge of doing that. And fortunately, we had a president with the courage to stop them. Now, nobody knows how this is going to turn out. Now that we're in it, we've got to win it. But that was the choice. It wasn't a choice between no conflict and conflict. It was between appeasement, which hasn't worked, and conflict. And if you want to look at history on this, we had the same choice in 1938 at Munich. And the Allies, were negotiated with Hitler over Czechoslovakia. Hitler wanted to take over the Sudetenland, which would allow him then to take over all of Czechoslovakia. Czechoslovakia had a 1 million-man army. If the Allies had tried to stop Hitler, then they could have with Czechoslovakia's 1 million-man army. But they were exhausted by World War I, so they chose appeasement, hoping that would stop Hitler. Well, it didn't stop. Churchill said to Chamberlain, after he came back from Munich with his appeasement deal, Chamberlain called it peace in our time. When Churchill said to Chamberlain, at Munich, you're given a choice between war and dishonor. You chose dishonor and you shall have war. And that war turned out to be World War II, which took 60 to 90 million lives. So that's the choice here. These are hard, tough decisions. We don't know how this is going to turn out. But now that we're in it, we have to win it.
Don Tracy running for the Republican nomination for U.S. Senate out of Illinois, and another big issue that the Senate is likely going to be either addressing soon or it's going to be an issue when you get in there, if you get in there, and that is the filibuster. Clearly, President Trump has made it an issue to say, blast through that, get something passed on voter ID. How do you feel about the filibuster? Is it necessary or is it being abused?
First, let me say every state should have voter photo ID. There is no justification for not having voters identify themselves before they vote for the leader of the free world, for the president of the most powerful country in the history of the world. The Democrats will say, well, we can't have voter ID because there's some hermit living in the mountains of North Carolina that doesn't have a government-issued photo ID. Well, almost all voter ID bills I've heard of, they will provide you with a free government-issued ID. Then what they'll say is that, well, voter ID, it makes it harder for people to, vote. They have to bring their driver's license with them to vote or something like that. And so it will suppress voting. Well, voter ID will suppress voting. It will suppress illegal voting. So there's just no justification for not having voter ID. It's an 80-20 issue. Even a majority of Democrats support it. The only people who don't support it are Democrat activists and political leaders. And also then the other part of the bill, the SAVE Act, is registration. You have to prove citizenship for registration. Well, I thought the rule was the Democrats admit the law is only citizens vote. Okay, then why shouldn't you have to prove citizen when you register? And then they'll try to conflate it by saying, well, not everybody has their birth certificate when they're going to vote. You don't, under the SAVE Act, you don't need to prove citizenship every time you vote. Only when you register or re-register, that sort of thing. So the SAVE Act is very important because it would require every state, not just, I think there's 26 states that have some form of that, but a lot of the blue states, of course, they don't. The Democrat-controlled states don't. So it's a really important act. I'm a strong supporter of the filibuster. I mean, without the filibuster, you would have a yo-yo government. Every time we have an administration change in Washington, and recently it's been every 4 years, you just go from one side, completely radical far left administration to, a good, what we consider good conservative, responsible, smart administration. But the Senate, with its filibuster, requires a certain amount of bipartisanship. Some of the worst bills we've ever had, like Obamacare, they're one-sided. They had 60 votes just for a short period of time, and they rammed it down our throats. And it's a bad bill, and it's a bad bill because it wasn't bipartisan. If you're going to do big stuff like that, you need bipartisanship. So I support the filibuster. Now, one kind of compromise to get the SAVE Act passed without blowing up the filibuster. And remember, Harry Reid blew it up. And look what it cost the Democrats. It gave us, a Supreme Court of 6 Republicans to 3. And McConnell told Reid when he blew up the filibuster for voting for the Supreme Court, someday you will regret this. Maybe sooner than later, or sooner than you realize. And he was right. So there are consequences to blowing up the filibuster. It could really blow up in our face if we blow it up. So, just think what the Democrats would do without the filibuster. They would make Puerto Rico a state with 2 Democrat senators. They would make Washington, D.C. a state with 2 Democrat senators. They would pack the Supreme Court. So, I support the filibuster. Now, there's talk about the talking filibuster. And that's something new. There are pros and cons to that. For something big like this, I think maybe we should try the talking filibuster, but there are downsides to it because it would allow Democrats to present all kinds of amendments. It would tie up the Senate. We wouldn't be able to get other things done. So it's not a risk-free alternative.
Don Tracy, Republican running for the nomination. Of course, the March 17th primary is right around the corner. Let's talk now with Jeannie Evans, who's one of 6 candidates on the ballot for this primary coming up on Tuesday. Jeannie, thanks for taking time with us. And let's go ahead and get right on into it. For people who are not familiar with who you are, you're on the ballot. Tell us about yourself.
Yeah, I think in Illinois, people are struggling with high prices, high crime. Democrat leadership has not solved those problems for us, and people are looking for a fresh voice, someone who will innovate to make our communities safer and bring down prices so people can afford housing and to put food on the table and pay their electric bill. I am a political outsider. I graduated from Harvard Law School. I've spent my career as a lawyer, taking on powerful corporations to level the playing field for small businesses and to bring down prices for Americans. I do antitrust work. I sue companies for price fixing so that we break up illegal monopolies, we promote competition in the markets, and we bring down prices. And I think that's what people are looking for. A lot of candidates are talking about affordability. Voters are talking about affordability, and I bring the skills and experience to do that. I've been very successful. I've recovered billions of dollars for American families. I've worked hand in hand with the Department of Justice on these issues. I have been named one of the top antitrust enforcement lawyers in the country. So I'm very excited to bring my knowledge and skills to Washington to take on industries like healthcare, where there's a lot of anti-competitive structures, try to remove those and bring down prices dramatically.
Now, of course, Republicans taking a Republican ballot March 17th. Many probably already have voted early, with the state having 40 days to vote early in the land of Lincoln. So for those who haven't voted, they've got 6 choices on there. What separates you from the other candidates?
I want Illinois voters to know that I am a conservative Republican that shares their Christian values, their family values. I was blessed with wonderful parents who raised me in a Christian home to love the gospel and to love the Constitution of the United States. My father read to me from the Constitution as a child. He read me the Federalist Papers as a child and bedtime stories. He's read me, as a young person, economic theory. So I'm very rooted in freedom, free markets, free enterprise, and those conservative principles of trying to reduce the size of government, lowering taxes, and letting people decide how to spend their own money rather than taxing people and then trying to spend that money on their behalf. I think people can figure out how to spend it themselves. So I want to work with our president and the current administration to peel back a lot of the regulations on businesses that are making it hard for them to thrive. So we want to cut red tape, cut taxes, so businesses can be successful. They can create jobs, innovate, and create opportunities for people in Illinois and across our country. I'll tell you a little bit more about myself. My husband and I have been married for 32 years. We have raised our family on the south side of Chicago, where my husband works, and where I've worked as a lawyer. And our 4 kids attended Chicago public schools. We've been active in our Christian church community on the south side, and we've had great experiences, but we've also seen the devastating impacts of crime. We've had loved ones who have lost friends, family to crime, and who are fed up with Democrat leadership that is not making their communities safer. So I am somebody who will support law enforcement. I will work to get them the resources and tools they need to do their job, to see that we have the staffing levels, not just in Chicago, but I will be representing the entire state, and I will be working to increase the staffing levels so that we can make our communities safe. I'm ready to go to Washington and to work for the American people. I've been tough in the courtroom. I've been tough negotiating settlements for my clients, and I've gotten great results, and I want to get great results for the American people.
We're talking with Jeannie Evans. She is one of the 6 candidates running for the Republican nomination to fill the U.S. Senate seat being vacated by Democrat Dick Durbin, who's been in Congress for decades. Jeannie, you've got, of course, a lot of different issues that you're going to be grappling if you do get past the primary and pass the November election, one of those being the ongoing conflict in Iran. Should that be declared a war, and what are your thoughts on this?
I want to give my overriding position is that we do need to stop Iran from getting nuclear weapons. The regime in Iran has been exporting terrorism around the world. They've been the primary funder of the major terrorists in our world, Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis. The data is that they're responsible for about 90% of their funding. And we do need to cut that off. And this is a religious ideology in Iran that preaches death to America and that they want to destroy Israel, destroy America. And I think we have to take seriously that if they had nuclear weapons, they might use them, and they might use them against us. They had already gotten intermediate ballistic missiles. We cannot let them get long-range ballistic missiles that could hit the United States. We cannot let them enrich uranium and make those warheads that they could put on those missiles and hit the United States. We cannot let them get nuclear bombs. This had to happen. They're just a regime that cannot get nuclear weapons, and our president is correct that we had to take action to stop them. And I think that the intelligence they were getting is that they were too close and we had to stop it.
Another big issue senators are facing right now, you got the Save America Act that President Donald Trump is urging Congress to pass. The House has already passed it, and now the Senate's dealing with it. But I do want you to sound off on voter ID. But first, let's talk about the filibuster. What are your thoughts on that, and should that be something that's done away with in the U.S. Senate?
Yeah, I'll take both of these issues. So I do support voter ID. I think the majority of the country does. I think the polling is that both Republicans and Democrats, we have, I think, an average of the whole country of 80% supports voter ID. They want to know that their vote counts, that the only people who are voting are those that are authorized to vote, and we want to have secure elections and have faith in our elections. So I think that's important. In terms of the filibuster, I do believe that the founders, I believe in the Constitution. I believe in the founding. I believe they were wise. And I think one of the structures of the Senate is such that it does slow things down a little bit so that we can get consensus on issues. Without the filibuster, it's easier to pass legislation for the party in power, but it also has less support, and it's easy to overturn the next time. There's less support behind it. And so I think part of our system, it's frustrating for those in power who want to get their agenda accomplished, but they're at some point they're going to be in the minority and wish that they had some ability to stop legislation moving too quickly if it doesn't have full, broader support.
Talking with Jeannie Evans, again, a candidate for U.S. Senate for the Republicans on the March 17th ballots, and that is just a handful of days away here. You've got a whole host of other things that we could talk about for hours about Illinois, but one thing that I think is important taxpayers need to know is your position on whether President Trump should withhold federal tax dollars from the state of Illinois for a variety of reasons, like, Illinois having no cash bail, Illinois having certain policies concerning transgender ideology, or, SNAP dollars to possibly require, the state taxpayers to make up the difference. Where do you stand on using the power of the purse from Congress to get policy changes out of a state like Illinois?
Big picture is that Illinois government needs to care more about the people than they care about fighting Trump. I think we have under Governor Pritzker and his Lieutenant Governor, Juliana Stratton, we have leadership that cares more about fighting Trump than getting things done for the people of Illinois. If I were elected, I would be building unity. I'd be building unity within the Republican Party, building unity among Republicans and Democrats to work with the federal government. If the federal government has money and funding and resources for us, we want to take advantage of it. We want to use it. We want to welcome it. We want to talk to the president, say, thanks for giving us resources. Let's talk about the best way to use them. Let's talk about what you have to offer and what is going to work best for the people of Illinois. And I would be working to make that happen and getting the resources that we can in a way that we want them and that we can use them on a long-term basis.
You mentioned one of the more recognizable names on the Democrat side. They've got 10 candidates that Democrats have to choose from in the March 17th primary. That if you were to advance out of the March primary into the November general midterm election, you would face. What have you been watching from the Democrat side? What are some of the things that you're hearing them message during the primary? And how do you combat some of those ideas?
What I'm hearing on the Democrat side is a lot of wanting to tax and spend, raise taxes for a host of programs. They're talking about how the government can take care of us. The government can do this for you and that for you. I believe in freedom. I believe people can make decisions for themselves and provide for themselves. So we want to lower taxes, leave the money with the people. So you hear about subsidies. We'd rather than tax people and give money back to them in subsidies, we want to just leave the money with the people and let them choose what to do for it. what to do with their own money. So I think we've had Democrat leadership in Illinois. We know what that looks like. We know that with the taxes and the host of regulations that they've enacted, businesses are leaving our state. We've had major employers, Boeing, Citadel, Tyson Foods, Caterpillar. These are huge companies that brought great jobs, high-paying jobs, and they've left the state because of the just regulatory burden and the tax burden. We want to get them back. We want to keep not just large businesses, but small businesses. We've seen a decline in small businesses. That's dangerous. Small businesses are the growth engine of the economy. They are the big businesses of tomorrow. We want to welcome them and nurture them. The Democratic leadership just in the last year has raised the filing fee, like the renewal licensing fees for small businesses, by incredible amounts. It's unaffordable. We're driving out businesses. We want to welcome businesses. We want more jobs. We want more competition. The more businesses, the more competition, prices go down. And that's lower prices for all of us. And it's more jobs so we can earn the money to pay for them. I think the people of Illinois, that's what they're looking for. They want a good economy, jobs for their kids and grandkids so they can stay here. They want safer communities, and they want an education system that's actually educating their kids and preparing them for the workforce. And that's what that's what I bring to the table. I think that message is going to resonate not just with Republicans in this primary on March 17th, but with all the voters of Illinois in November.
Jeannie Evans, one of 6 candidates on the Republican ballots to take the U.S. Senate nomination for the GOP on the March 17th ballot. You've got a whole bunch of other choices, and this is just one of them. So, Jeannie, I greatly appreciate you taking the time with us here for the Center Square Daily. And joining us here for Illinois in Focus is Pamela Denise Long. She's one of 6 Republican candidates vying for the GOP nomination. Pamela, thanks for taking time with us today. And let's just start off with how you guys are feeling heading into the home stretch here. The election is Tuesday.
Yeah, it's good to see you again. And it's poetic because I believe you were my first major media stop when I launched my campaign back in May. And we're feeling good. We're resonating everywhere we land, although there are some stakeholders, NBC5 in Chicago, who's iced us out. And so we've filed an FCC complaint about that.
Big issues you're hearing from potential constituents across the states when it comes to how the federal government impacts the land of Lincoln.
Yeah. So what are we hearing? What we're hearing is that we're not seeing enough representation. What we're hearing is people seeing sold out. What we're hearing is that people are hopeful that my voice, right, will go to Washington, D.C. and actually represent the people because I've been presenting the policies that I'm going to implement within 90 days. They're upset that people aren't standing on what needs to be done in terms of protecting women and girls, in terms of outing people who've abused their power, in terms of, funding foreign wars and the like. We want to see Americans first, and we're here for it. It's about time.
Pamela, talk a bit about some of those headlines we're seeing right now, right? If you're in the U.S. Senate, you've got, your ability to sound off on, say, the conflict and the military operations over in Iran. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh my gosh. I don't like regime change. I think I've talked about that a bit before. I think that we are curating enemies. I'm concerned that there are more casualties from American troops than has been expressed. I'm concerned that this could be another forever war. I need to see an exit strategy. And, we should hope to see that before I'm elected, right? We need to see that post haste so we know how we're going to get out of that. And so what I'm hearing from people is that they're afraid. And what I'm hearing from soldiers also who are vets are that they're concerned that this could be a never-ending war.
Pamela Denise Long, one of the Republicans running for the Republican nomination for U.S. Senate with us here. And another big issue that's in the headlines, voter ID and a mandate that the Trump administration is putting on Congress, wanting them to pass the Save America Act. But the U.S. Senate is where it's at, and there could be some issues with the filibuster. First, what are your thoughts on the filibuster? And then let's talk a little bit about voter ID.
Yeah, so I've expressed before that the filibuster is baked into the congressional processes because it is the voice of the minority. It is what helps the U.S. Senate be more deliberative in the things that we implement. I would say I've always supported voter ID. One of my first articles for Newsweek is that voter ID is patriotic. I don't know a Black American, despite what liberals say, who doesn't have an ID, and certainly there are processes in which we could help folks get an ID. One of the things that I've expressed to congressional stakeholders is I want to make sure that election integrity also ensures that every eligible American citizen is able to vote. And we should not have people who are non-citizens determining any aspect of our legislation or executive oversight at local, state, nor federal level.
Pamela, as a Black woman in Republican politics, what do you feel is going to be the Black voters' impact on this U.S. Senate campaign, especially considering the field that you've seen on the Democrat side?
Yeah, so Black Americans are breaking up with the Democratic Party, and I'm here for that as well. One of the articles that I wrote for Newsweek. But what I'm also knowing about the Black American community, since I've done so much work in that community, including in Chicago, is that what they're looking for is people who are advocating for their interests. They're looking for authentic relationship. We can't win the general election without also digging into 20 to 30% of Cook County, and that's going to have to include Black Americans. And so what I've called Republicans to do over the years is to actually bring their A game and understand the Black community. And I believe that I am the candidate on this side of the aisle who has those relationships and has that understanding and also has the policies that Black Americans are resonating with right now.
In the U.S. Senate, you'll be dealing with a lot of federal policies. You may be dealing with things that would impact Illinois directly. I know the Trump administration's had some executive orders out there to withhold federal funds from states and jurisdictions that have no cash bail, for instance. Is that something that you would support in withholding funds from a state like Illinois to have some policy changes on an issue like public safety?
Yeah, so public safety certainly can raise to the federal level. I think I understand the inequities, if you will, that people were trying to correct by the no cash bail, but they overshot the target by a long shot when you have people who've been arrested 30 plus times, including for violent crimes, and they're released without bail. What they wanted to do is make sure that people that innocent before proven guilty, right, is implemented. And so we need to definitely take a look at what that looks like. I'm not sure about withholding funds for that reason, but I think we need to look at the impact, investigate the impact of what the Safety Act has done and what no cash bail has done around the country and decide what's the best course to go in fixing that, both the inequities and making sure that we're on target.
Another criticism I hear about the interplay between a state like Illinois and the federal coffers is the state of Illinois is a giver state. I've seen, Democrats for years talk about how they need to capture more federal dollars to bring back to Illinois. Is that a concern of yours, that Illinoisans pay more in federal income tax than the state gets back? And how do you go about getting and securing more of those federal tax dollars for the land of Lincoln?
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that because I've been in conversation with some whistleblowers, if you will, that are talking about the ways in which the state has left money on the table. We're talking billions of dollars simply by not doing their job and not completing paperwork because, I don't know, people aren't watching. There's no DOGE, there's no efficiency and effectiveness. So we want to make sure that the state of Illinois is held accountable for its reliance upon tax dollars when it's not taking advantage of the grant money and other discretionary funding that's been available to it.
And Pamela, one thing I've heard criticism about your candidacy, people are characterizing it as your push for reparations. Do you want to take a moment to clarify what you're talking about in that conversation?
Yeah, so of course, reparations is the R word, right? It's people's own understanding of what it is. I'm not running on reparations. However, I support any American's First Amendment right to hold the government accountable, whether it be J6ers who were literally let into the Capitol, but the Department of Justice was weaponized against them. Whether it be American citizens who are holding the government accountable for the ways they've replaced us all via mass immigration, both legal and illegal. What I am proposing, to be correct, is that we sunset minority spending by redirecting half of those funds to the people it was originally designed for. Currently, a minority is anyone who's not a straight white Christian male. So a descendant of an enslaver can come over here and code as Black and be a minority. A Chinese man can come over here, a gay man can be a minority. I think it's wrong. I think it's wasteful. And I think the way we sunset that is to meet original intent. And in about 40 to 50 years, based on economic projections, we can save $24 trillion and settle the issue.
All right, well, Pamela, obviously, we've got just a handful of days before the March 17th primary. Here it is, the kind of opportunity for you to set yourself apart from the other 5 candidates that are on the ballot. What makes Pamela Denise Long the right choice?
Yeah, I'm the right choice because I have 30 years of experience across the areas that the U.S. Senate will write legislation for, as well as investigate to make sure that Americans' rights are being preserved and protected. We've had lawyers running our system for a really long time now, and look at where we are. In addition to that, antitrust law, for example, as one of my competitors talks about, is something that happens within the executive branch, not the legislative branch. We already have antitrust laws, and what we need is those who have the broad experience to investigate those things. I have the support that we're going to need in Cook County in order to win the general. And I think what this March 17th primary comes down to is who can win the general, who has the voice and message and policies that are going to deliver. I'm endorsed by Veterans for America First, and we'll have legislation for that. I'm also endorsed by Peoria County Republican Central Committee. I'd ask people to take a look at my website at longforsenate2026.com and make the wise decision so that we can win this come November, and we can make Illinois a model of what it means to unite a state and thus unite a nation.
Well, Pamela Denise Long, one of the 6 candidates for the Republicans on the March 17th ballot. Greatly appreciate you taking the time with us.